Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Really glad you could join me today out here in the vegetable gardens. It's a beautiful day here in Pennsylvania, Zone 6. We're now into the third week of June. It's like 84 degrees right now, so it's going to be like 90 degrees and humid. But, you know, with this heat, now the plants are just thriving in the garden. Your peppers and your melons and tomatoes, they just love the heat. Well, today I wanted to share with you 6 quick tips on how to grow Fordhook Giant Swiss Chard in your garden. And this is one of the leaves that I just picked from out in my garden. The leaf is actually 18 inches long. And so thanks for joining me today out here in the vegetable garden. I thought I would share those 6 quick tips on how to grow this Swiss chard over there at my garden structure where it's in the shade. So follow me along. While the birds are really singing this morning, it's really nice to be able to sit here. That cedar tree behind me, my sister bought me that house wren birdhouse over the winter, so I put it up in the spring. It's nice to be able to watch those birds come in and out of that birdhouse. Right now there's little babies in the birdhouse. It's, you know, but what a beautiful time of the year to be out in the garden. The wildflowers are blooming, the birds are singing. Now that we have all the plants in the garden and the sun is shining and the soil's warming up, these plants are really starting to take off. My hope here at Plant Smart Living is to help everyone find their inner farmer, to inspire people, to educate people, to encourage people, and to think about growing their own food in their backyards. You hear so much today about growing kale in your garden and how nutritious kale is. It's kind of like on the front burner today, but you don't hear a whole lot about Swiss chard. And I would like to move Swiss chard up to the front burner along with kale, because Swiss chard is something really easy to grow. It's full of phytonutrients and antioxidants. It has vitamin A, vitamin B1, 2, and 3. It has vitamin C. It has vitamin K. It's just packed full of nutrition. It has calcium, fiber, it's high in iron, has folate in it, magnesium, manganese, copper. Again, it's just a powerhouse of nutrition. It's one of my favorite leafy greens to grow out in the garden. Quick tip number 1 would be Swiss chard likes a good, loose, fertile soil. Now you want to make sure you go through your garden, and I use my garden fork and I go through and work it back and forth in the soil. You want to make sure your soil's nice and loose. Make sure you either amend it with compost or grass clippings, leaves. Of course, you want to make sure all those are broken down real well and composted. And then you just want to, like here in my gardens, I also grow all my plants in my raised beds. Raised beds allow the plants to warm up earlier in the season. If you get heavy rains, being the beds are elevated, the plants won't drown. You can also grow Swiss chard on your patio or balcony in containers. It's something really easy to do. So I use the Fordhook Giant Swiss chard in my garden. The leaves get really big. I actually did a video a couple of years ago where the one plant from the bottom of the stalk to the top of the leaf was 42 inches and the actual leaf itself was 24 inches. So when you grow Swiss chard in your garden, you really can get a bang for your buck. Quick tip number 2 would be, make sure you plant your Swiss chard in the proper environment. Now, leafy greens like your Swiss chard or your kale or collard greens, your mustard greens, your lettuce, they can get away with like 4 to 6 hours of sunlight. Now, anything with a fruit like your tomatoes or your peppers or your melons, carrots, they like a good 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So when you go out in your garden, you just want to be mindful of the certain areas where you're going to plant certain vegetables, because if you don't get enough sunlight in those areas, say you planted tomatoes more in the shade, well, they're not going to produce to their fullest harvest. They're going to be kind of limpy. And so you really want to make sure you have proper sunlight for whatever vegetable you plant out in your garden. Quick tip number 3 would be planting your Swiss chard in the garden. Now, if you direct sow your seeds out in your garden, you could sow them in your soil maybe 4 weeks before your last frost date. You typically dig like a 1/2 inch furrow, take your trowel if you want, and dig about a 1/2 inch furrow there and plant your seeds a couple inches apart, and then obviously backfill and tamp the soil and then keep them nice and moist. But if you plant your seedlings or transplants out in your garden, you can plant those like 2 weeks before your last frost date. Swiss chard can tolerate both cooler temperatures and the hot summer heats, which makes it really beneficial. Swiss chard is also in the spinach family, so it's very similar to spinach. That's one reason I love growing Swiss chard in the garden, is because your spinach bolts when that hot summer heat comes, but Swiss chard continues all season long, right up to your first heavy frost. So it's just a wonderful green to grow in your garden. Quick tip number 4 would be, when you plant your seedlings out in your garden, you want to space those anywhere from 6 inches to 12 inches apart. Some people even like make one continuous furrow and plant your seeds like every 2 inches apart. And then when they start coming up, you can just let them grow to their full extent. You don't even have to thin them out. But I did that with my kale this springtime. I planted 2 8-foot rows of kale seeds out in the garden, direct sowed them, and planted them maybe anywhere from 1 to 2 inches apart in the soil. And then I didn't thin them out at all. I just let them grow on their own. And I was just amazed. I'm amazed how big of a harvest I'm getting just from those 2 8-foot rows of kale seeds without me thinning them out. And so you might want to do that as an experiment with your Swiss chard. Just plant 2 rows of them and don't thin them out and see how they grow. Or you could plant an extra row of your Swiss chard seeds and then thin them out every 6 to 12 inches and then see how they do, one compared against the other. Quick tip number 5 would be, like all vegetables, you want to make sure you give your vegetables a nice, even, consistent watering. Now, if it doesn't rain during the week, you want to water your plants, especially if you direct sow out in your garden. You want to make sure you keep those seedlings moist, keep that soil moist during the germination period. Even as they grow in the soil, when they're young, you want to just keep that soil moist. You want to make sure you water your plants maybe 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. And what that does, that allows or trains the roots of your plants to grow deep into the soil. And so you just want to make sure you give them a good deep watering, maybe once a week if it doesn't rain. You know, once they get larger, you can do that once a week. As they grow and mature, maybe for the first couple weeks, you might need to water them every day or every couple days. I just love this mason jar with the screw-on handle. I did a video a couple weeks ago about where you can order these online through Amazon. But I just love making mint tea from the garden. That's pretty much what I drink all summer long, is mint tea and just water from our well. Well, quick tip number 6 would be harvesting your Swiss chard. Now, as your Swiss chard grows and matures, you can pick it, when it's a couple inches high. Those leaves are maybe 4 to 6 inches long. Now, when you do harvest your leaves, you want to make sure you pick the outer leaves. It's called pick and come again. So as long as you continue to pick those outer leaves, your plant will produce all summer long. And so it's just amazing the massive amount of food growing Swiss chard out in your garden will produce. And so let me encourage you to really think about growing Swiss chard out in your garden, whether it's the bright light variety. The bright lights is a pretty type of Swiss chard. I've planted that in the garden. It's very colorful. Swiss chard is also ornamental, and so you can plant it in your flower beds. It's that pretty. Now, I also take the Swiss chard leaves, I add that to my salads every night. I pick some kale and some Swiss chard leaves, cut them up nice, and I add some tomatoes and peppers and any chickpeas to my salad. I add a sprinkle of balsamic vinegar to add some flavor, but I just love the Swiss chard. I also steam that Swiss chard with some garlic and onions and have that as a side dish with potatoes, or sometimes I'll bake a couple of potatoes and just put the steamed Swiss chard right over the potatoes, and so it's just a meal that's packed full of nutrition. Well, I hope this video was able to give you some tips and ideas on how to grow Fordhook Swiss chard in your vegetable garden. And if you have any questions or comments about this video, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And you can also visit us at PlantSmartLiving.com. And you can also visit us on Facebook at Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred, or you can visit me on my personal page, Fred Detwiler, where I share a lot of my videos and photographs of wildlife and nature. You can also become a member of our Facebook page called Best Plant Smart Recipes. There people share a lot of wonderful, tasty and delicious, nutritious, plant-based and vegan recipes there. And if you were to I would approve your membership if you were to just visit us there. We have over like 5,000 members there, and so it's just a great place to get some free recipes for nutritious living. Well, anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful day and a bountiful garden season. So until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.